that guy in the news?
Yeah.
They do that just before they go to KP.
Yeah.
On their way to KP, they drag them in that way.
They drag him in like that to go on a mission.
Oh, Mr.
No.
Custer, I don't want to go.
That's before they even sign up.
Right. This goes back to when they wanted me to do a flu shot and I refused the flu shot.
And I just came for the breakfast. I'm out of here for Christmas shopping.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you. It's good.
That's okay, dear. You don't have to.
I am going to. Definitely.
So this month for the men's breakfast, Ray's going to talk about flying in and landing and taking off aircraft carriers. And Ray and I had the chance to go to Hot Springs last year and talk to the Hot Springs students about Vietnam. And that was interesting for us. So Ray, I guess I'll turn it over to you and thank you for coming in and helping us.
You know,
I'll get you to sit down.
an interesting point was we did some close air support missions with guys like John, and it was the most difficult thing in the world in a sense, because anytime we're bombing, we cruise around at 10,000 feet above whatever the elevation is, and that's why we pick targets out at 10,000 feet above it. And in the dive, we drop the bomb at 5,000 feet so that we can recover in time not to get blown up. So, and one mission of close air support with some people that were held down by a gun sight, I was leading and we dropped on a gun sight, and it's hard to see. It's all in mountain areas like this, not as high, but mountain, it's just trees. So the forward air controller that's telling where it is says, okay, do you see this? Do you see this? Okay, here's where the gun sight is. So, okay, I was pretty sure where the gun sight was. I mean, that's it, right? I tell him, yep, that's it, that's it. I dropped the bomb, and all of a sudden he says, ceasefire, ceasefire. And I thought, I was afraid I'd hit the wrong place, because they were within 100 yards of the gun sight. And he says, hang on. He called back. He said, no, it was too loud. You got the gun sight. This was South Vietnamese troops. I knew then they weren't going to do very well. I said, if I was getting held down, I wouldn't care if blood was running out of my ears. And I don't know about you, John, but but it's interesting because it was too loud. And I would have never wanted to be underground. I felt so fortunate where I was. And one time in the BOQ, Bachelor Officer Quarters, that I was in the Philippines, my guy that was in the next room, we shared a bathroom. He'd been one of the Marines that was we'd done close air support on. It just so happened we're in the same place. At about the same time, I said, I was so glad I was where I was. And he said, you kidding? He said, do you know how many people were shooting at you and everything? But we both were where we wanted to be. But I never want to be where John was.
And speaking of we call them Marvins, the South Vietnamese Army Rangers. Anyway, we call them Marvins, and they got us into more trouble. Way was a pain in the neck.
Yeah, I knew this was they called it Lam Son 719, where they're going to cut across from Khe Sanh across Laos, and it was all an ARVN deal. So much of our military equipment and everything, but they got about a third of the way across, and that's about where I dropped on that gun sight, and they gave up and retreated. Of course, left all our material there, but I mean, it would have worked if they could have done. Well, okay, these pictures aren't in order. We had I won't go through the whole reason it isn't, but we've just got some various pictures. This I think was, I refused to take the flu shot when they came around and said the flu shot. So they were going to force me to. Well, I ended up, they were going to pretty extreme measures, but I did win out. I didn't do the flu shot, so yeah. Well, this was in some of these random things. This was someone's wedding. You can go through this here pretty quick. This was the ship we were on, and normally this was in the Philippines. Normally they had a port we could tie up at, but when we got in there was one other ship that hadn't left yet, so they put it out. But an interesting story about this is a sidelight. This is the anchor, it's on this side, they have one on this side. The ship, when we left California to come out there, had just come through a big rework thing. Well, the first anchor they dropped came out and it wasn't fastened, it went right to the bottom of the ocean here. And so it made you feel pretty comfortable about the ship. Okay. We flew, a normal day we'd fly 8 missions that are about an hour and a half each. So what you do is, before you load up, you have all the airplanes lined up, loaded up. The ship turns into the wind, we launch, and then while it's in the wind after we launch, the one that was just flying comes back and then they land on it. Okay. Now you can see the cables here on the deck. There are four cables. The target cable to land on, if you were on the correct glide slope, was number 3. If you're on the correct glide slope, when you came over the deck, you're within 10 feet of hitting the ramp. So you can see if you hit a number 1, that was not good because you came very close. Every landing you made on the deck was graded. And in fact, the LSO, which I was one of the LSO landing signals officer, at the end of every recovery, you go through and then you talk to every pilot that landed to give him what his grade is and what he did. He had a little book that kept track of it, kept track of all the grades. At the end of each line period, you get awards for the top ones. And the other thing was, if you did hit the number 1 cable, you owed 50 cents. If you forgot to lower your gear, you owed $25. If you forgot to lower your hook, you owed $25. At the end of the cruise, which was a 10-month cruise, we had several $1,000s, and of course, I have to say most of it went to alcohol, but we had a big party at the end. Okay.
So Rick, couple questions. Maybe not everybody knows why you turn the ship into the wind when you take off.
Yeah, so whenever you land, you don't want a crosswind, for instance. You've got a very narrow window to land on the ship, and you want to have wind down the deck to slow you down, because our indicated airspeed is around 150 knots, which is about 170 miles an hour. So what they do, the goal was to have 30 miles an hour wind over the deck. So if the wind, the ship had to have 15 miles an hour for turning speed. So if the wind was at least, if it was 15 knots of wind, then you'd have 30 knots over the deck. And then,
what's the reason you need to turn into the wind though?
to keep the wind right down the deck line.
Goes to front to back.
Yeah, correct. So if we've got a 30 knot wind and we're indicating 150, then really we're landing at 120. You know what I mean? The wind is slowing you down that much. So that's what's the goal, to get 30 knots of wind. And if we had more wind than that, like I say, they had to, if sometimes we have a 40 mile an hour wind and they had to go 15, it was just too much because it's so steep then. This does have my name on it, but they put our names on at least one of the airplanes. This is a 20 millimeter guns here. We normally carried, this one here is a tanker. Okay, so it's got, we carry 2,000 pounds of fuel, 300 gallons on the center line, and then carry bombs on the wing.
What kind of plane is that?
A4 Skyhawk. We could carry one 500 pound on this one, 2 500-pounders on this one, 2 500-pounders, 500-pounder. And occasionally, if we're going after something like we went after Thanwa Bridge, we carried a 2,000-pound bomb on the center line, 1,000-pound bomb on each one of these, and a 500-pound bomb on that. So this is all lined up, ready to go for a launch. And the first thing they do to launch, and you can see the cables here again. The first airplanes to launch would be the fighters, the F-8s, and then they'd launch the tanker that'd go up, and then the bombers. If we had 3 bombing squadrons, A4 squadrons. Ours was the Flying Eagles, which had the 300 numbers. Magic Stones were the 400 numbers, and Garfish was the 500 numbers. Okay. And occasionally they'd launch this one right here, was a S2 propeller airplane with a ray dome on top, would launch when we were up and flying, that could keep track when they'd launch the MiGs. Okay. This one is an A4 tanker, so it's got fuel, 300 gallons, 300 gallons, 300 gallons, and then this drogue would come out to refuel. We had 2 catapults. The newer, bigger carriers have 3 catapults. They have these 2 in the front. They call a waste cat that goes off here. These were steam catapults, and now they start off with hydraulic ones, went to steam, and now they're back to some kind of a hydraulic one that doesn't work as well as the steam catapults. So what they would do when you taxi up here, you hooked on a cable that would fasten solid to the back of the airplane, and you had a little metal thing with a weak link in the middle. So what that was strong enough to do was once they got hooked up and you tightened it up, and then you had a shuttle that would hook on to a cable here and here to pull you down. You tighten that cable up back here, you'd run the power up to 100% because that metal thing would hold until the shuttle pulled you and it would break that and off you go. So you'd go from sitting here to about 190 miles an hour in 2.5 seconds. So it's pretty good transverse G's. And you didn't want to leave anything up on this gunner shield. And that's experience talking.
Oh.
Yeah, it comes back pretty quick.
Was it a cup of coffee?
Well, no, I did not drink coffee, but it was a solid thing.
So
And
how long in between each plane did that take? You had to reset everything, correct?
less than probably a minute.
Really?
Yeah, because all it does after that shuttle took you down there, the shuttle came back. Next airplane's ready to taxi up on, he's on.
Wow.
And then you'd launch one from this one, then you'd launch one from this one. And then the first thing you do was if you take off this catapult, you do a right clear on this one, a left one, because as a good friend of mine, his shuttle failed and he went in the water. The boat can't turn that quick, so you wanted to get out of the way of the boat if you end up going in the water. You never knew, in the daytime, you could sort of feel how close you were to the water, but at nighttime you couldn't. And sometimes, if the deck is pitching, then they're not supposed to launch you when it's pitching down, but occasionally they did. If you would be watching, you'd see them blowing water up behind the airplane. One of my very dark night catapult shots, it was so dark out, I was at 5,000 feet before I could even push the nose over to get my flaps up because I was afraid I was going to hit that water. It was
What kind of training? I mean, that first time off that deck.
oh, you get that Pilots for Dummies book?
Yeah, I mean,
No, that's an interesting question because we started off, the first jet airplanes we flew, those Winn jets, was a straight wing, wasn't a angled wing like this, straight wing T2. So you went through training in that, and then you went out and you did landings ashore, and they would paint the size of a carrier. You do landings with the LSO. Then you went to the boat and you think, okay, I've done it now. And they go, now, because now you're going to the next airplane. We'll show you that one. And then that's more dangerous because you can stall and so on. So then you go out and you'd make six landings on a carrier, qualified on that, then you go to the next airplane. So it took about, I started training in January of 1968. I got my wings of July of 69. So it took a year and a half training. And this is the F8, the fighter. They had something different than us, and you can see he has that afterburner. And what that afterburner do is he just had fuel lines that went back to the back and would just ignite, and it gave him that extra boost. But it was enough boost to help. An interesting thing about this is you can see here the wing lifts up. So on the takeoff, the wing is up, and in landing, the wing is up. And what it is for landing is when you've got an angle of attack when you're landing, you're at your slowest speed that you can fly at. With the F8, if you didn't have the wing up, it'd be so steep that the pilot wouldn't be able to see. So the wing would, and I got to go fly the F8 one time down in San Diego, and it was, when you take off in burner, you had to get everything done. The first thing you had to do was get your gear up, and you get the wing down, then you get the flaps up, and you had to do all that when you're accelerating at that afterburner. You had to get all that done in about 20 seconds. It was quite an airplane, and the MiGs were very afraid of the F8 because the F4, you could spot it coming from miles away because it smoked a lot. The F8 had no smoke. You could, in fact, one of our guys got half a MiG kill because they came after us one time with MiGs, and Jerry Tucker was his name, and it was sort of cloudy, and he met the MiG coming, and he pulled up to engage him. The MiG pulled up too, and when he pulled up to here, the MiG guy just ejected. He didn't even want to get shot down, so he got half a kill on that. Okay. Oh, just a second. This is an A3. You can see how big it is compared to the others, and it was a tanker. That's all it was the tanker. And it, when you'll see pictures later of where the LSO platform is in the back when they're landing. It was a little intimidating because that wing came very close to where you were on the platform. And in fact, most of the time we would base the A3 in Da Nang because he could take off with a lot more fuel for tanking us than he could from the ship. But it was you can see it's.
Where does the LSO sit?
I'll show you that in one of these next ones. And our number, the number of this carrier is 19. As a little side note, we had the Ranger carrier that was working on Yankee Station at the same time we were. Its number was 61. Now, if you look at that, right? So one time we were on the LSO platform, we had no A7s on our boat, but that's what the Ranger had. They didn't have A4s; they had A7s. Well, an A7 shows up out there. Well, what happens is everybody calls you. If you call up, you call like 306 ball. So in other words, you tell LSO, I've got the ball, which is a little lens thing up here that tells you if it's in the middle, you're on the glide slope. If it's low, you're low. If it's high, you're high. So that's the first thing you call. Well, he showed up. He didn't call anything. So it must be an emergency. So we call they have to set the cables for a weight that you are. So when you call the ball, you tell them what your weight is, what your fuel state is, so they know how strong to make that cable. So in other words, the A3 might be twice as heavy as we are, so they've got to set it at a heavier weight. So we say A7, but we don't know what he's going to be. Well, okay, we'll set it at what we figure normal A7 landing weight would be, because we figure this has got to be a big emergency. So he lands, and he flew a good approach, and it turned out he thought he was at the other ship. And what happened was it was a friend of his, it was the LSO, and he called the ball, and of course the guy heard him because he's just about 10 miles over here. And he thought he was just being a joke, so he said, Roger, ball. So this guy thought everything was fine. But when he landed, well, you don't have to show my selfie. But when he landed, the little island on our little small ship compared to the Rangers, like right here, and he goes, uh-oh. Well, they put every squadron emblem on that plane you can imagine. When he took off, he looked like a flying billboard. You know, and our CAG LSO said, you know, we know that you'd like to learn how to land on a smaller ship, but you should schedule your times, you know, when we're not quite so busy.
Did that cost him a quarter?
It cost him a few bucks. It was, and this is why we would fly. We had a helmet, and we were on oxygen all the time. There was a little oxygen bottle in the back, so we had oxygen. Okay, and then this is how this was our gun sight. And you would set it up if you're doing a nighttime. We'd only do a 30-degree dive for bombs, so we had a setting we'd use for that. And daytime you do a 45 degrees, so you'd have a different setting, and just so you want to put this on here, and then you would, according to whatever the wind is, you would make corrections with this to figure out. And it was all, there was no computers. This was all, everything was had. We didn't have any autopilots on the airplane, and it was all, this was a tanker thing, and usually what would happen was, of course, the fighters would all take off with their afterburner. So the first thing they want to do is get tanked up, and then they would fly up, either come with us if we were taking a large group of us in North Vietnam, or they would set off what's bar cap, and they just wait off the coast. So if they launched the MiGs, they'd go after them. Okay. This is we call it a basketball. It was a tanker that was an emergency tanker, and when we transpacked across and we'd fly, if we transpacked instead of riding the ship, some of us had to do that. You'd fly from San Francisco to Hawaii, and we had to tank twice. And then Hawaii to Midway, didn't have to tank. Then to Wake, didn't have to tank, and then to Guam, Philippines. So this is what they had for marine tankers when we were on our way to Hawaii.
So Ray, how did they get you hooked up?
Well, so this would retract and had this little basket here, and you had, you can see it here a little bit. This is the refueling probe stuck out, so you would just fly up and put it in there. And it was a training thing. It did a few things, but when you're low on fuel, you got very good at it. That's another story of, okay, I can't get into all of them. Right. This is just an example of a spot where from North Vietnam into Laos were 3 passes, Bang Karai, Mugia, and I forget the other one. But that's where most of that's where everything came from North Vietnam down to fight in South Vietnam, is through Laos. And we call it a sandbox because we bombed so many things in that. And this is just a couple bombs going off. You can see we hit something pretty good right there. And you can see it's
Randy, how many feet are you off the ground in those pictures?
probably 10,000.
10,000?
The reason we stayed up there was because they could shoot. They had 23 millimeter, 37 millimeter, and a 57 millimeter shooting at you. And if you didn't stay up that high, a lot of times they track up your back and get you. So that's what we do. This was up in place in South Vietnam. And I'll put up I should put up that map, but North Vietnam, we had 2 areas where we had Yankee Station, which is right across from basically north of the DMZ, across from North Vietnam, between Hainan Island, which is a Chinese island, and Vietnam, and then you had Dixie Station, which is down by South Vietnam. So we did 90% of my flying was up on Yankee Station. We flew through South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and Laos, occasionally Cambodia. Okay. This is, you see these lines here. those were B-52 strikes. So when they dropped, they didn't have any precise places. They just dropped. And
It's fun being on the other side. You have to come over the radio, get your down, and boy, you didn't even know they was there. All of a sudden, the whole mountainside just started exploding.
it's it was interesting.
Yeah.
It's in North Vietnam. Route 1 is this one coming down here that comes down all through North Vietnam into the DMZ. We had a Russian trawler that would follow behind our ship all the time. And why in the world we couldn't just blow it up? If Trump were president, I bet we would have. But so what we would do, we'd take off when we're going into North Vietnam, and we organize overhead the ship. So you go off, organize, whatever, and go. Well, you know that the Russian guys are communicating with everybody in North Vietnam. So one time, I've got my good friend of mine, we're flying together on a 2-plane going into random targets in North Vietnam. I get a call on the squadron comm, and the guy says, anybody up? I said, yeah. He said, we're coming back. Oh, can you get back to the other? We're coming back, and there's a whole trail of trucks coming down Route 1. And he told me where it was. And of course, their bombs are all gone. All they got is 20 millimeter. And 20 millimeter, all it did was it pointed the direction where to shoot at you with because of the tracers. So I asked first I asked the wingman, I said, okay, do you mind if we'll just launch it? Well, we won't gather, we'll just go over there. So I called the air boss who was in charge of it. I said, hey, can you put me on the right catapult, him on the left? We're just gonna go off and go. Put us first. So he sends us off, well, we just go. Well, we caught him, and I dropped the rule, and the statute of limitations is over, so don't bother calling. But the rule was we could only do one drop in North Vietnam. Well, that's ridiculous. And our commanding officer, same way he couldn't, because it took one drop just to find out what the wind's doing, because those weathermen would not report to us what the weather's doing in there. So 2 drops that way. So I said, okay, I'm going to drop on the trucks are going down there. I said, I'm going to drop, I'll get the first truck and the thing, and then you get one in the back. And our next run, we'll just go down. Well, I made that run, got it. And then he came down, got the back. When I came in on my next run, when I pulled off, I said, I think I saw some fire. As I pulled off, I thought I saw a tracer go by. I said, were they shooting at me? He said, no, there wasn't any. I thought maybe I just seen a glint from the explosion below. When he rolled in, and as soon as he rolled in, they started shooting and they got him. So on that brief that morning, the only information we had that time was one guy, there was just about always a west wind. Well, a guy in an A6 got hit, and we always want to go feet wet. In other words, just the ocean, get feet wet. He got feet wet, but he punched out, and the wind was from the east that day, and it drifted him, and he got captured. So jokingly, all I said to him was, we briefed many times, I said, okay, well, if we get hit, let's make sure we get a long ways out over the water. So when he got hit, his engine quit, of course, and it's on fire. So we were headed out, told him you got to hit, had feet wet. We came out. I'm flying alongside of him. The fire is coming up closer to his wing. We get down lower, but we're only out over the water a few miles, but I was afraid it was going to blow up. I said, you better get out. And he punches out. So then we got rescap in, and he was rescued. But it was one of those days. And this was the spot where it happened. That's what I wanted to say. So I saw where the gun site was when we came back. So when one of my next missions, I got that gun site. We call this the little lobster tail here. Yeah. That's just an example of what the Ho Chi Minh Trail was like, doing over that thing. And that's why everything came down to come at Port John here, because they had trails through there. One time, it usually was all done at night. One time there was a truck there in the daytime he's running. I said, I bet he's had too much sake or something. He's trying to get through this mess here. And he's moving so fast, and every time you drop, there'd be so much dust you couldn't see him. Now they come out of the dust, you know. Well, another picture of that. Okay. That's what we look like with the bombs. And then we had, you're not seeing it, but out here on the wings are Shrike missiles. North Vietnam, this was a Shrike missile that would be honed in on the radar sites that would guide the SAMs. So, okay. This is one of the forward air controllers. They call it OV-10s. I got to ride over with one of them, went on a fact exchange. I went out of Thailand and rode with him on a mission as a forward air controller. It was pretty exciting. Okay. This is one guy that took a round of 37 millimeter in the back. And one thing with our airplanes, one of the last ones, you could disconnect the hydraulics and fly manual. So he lost his all hydraulics manually, landed in Thailand at Nakhon Phanom. Okay. You can see what they do. They're an exploding shell, so once it hit you, it did some pretty good damage. And if it hits your wing, we had one guy that landed back aboard the ship. You could stand up through the hole in his wings. This is coming back, so this is where the ship while we're out flying is cruising downwind. Now he's turning into the wind. We're getting ready to come in and land.
So is there just one person on each of those?
Planes? Yeah, it's a single, yeah. Okay, and you can see the refueling probe here.
And your tail hook is down.
And the tail hook is down, yeah. And you'd remind well, you wouldn't always remind your buddy because he's going to have to pay if he doesn't. There you can see that the plane's all lined up, ready for the launch.
Not much room.
No. Here's where the LSO platform is. And then you had a little thing out here with netting on it. So if you had to get out, you could jump in that net and you go in a little room here that's fireproof. One time I was LSO. In LSO, what you do is he stands here, and you got in your right hand is a pickle switch. You can give him wave offs or give him power, and then you got a phone. You're talking with him. One time I'm bringing a guy aboard, and it was an A3, and he got a little low, and I turned around to give the grade, and there's no one there. They'd all dumped in the net because they thought he was going to hit the net or hit the ramp. This was what they'd launch him for recovery ahead of every. There's an F8 coming aboard, and you had a light on this as well as the A4 that would tell you his speed, and you wanted this color light would mean that he's on speed. If it was red, he's too fast, or he's faster than he should be. If it's green, he's too slow. Okay, that looks like I say, if you were right on glide slope, you'd miss that deck by 10 feet. It looks a little low right there, yeah.
So Ray, so the hook, if you forgot to let it down, you just had to go back and do it again?
If you didn't have it down, yeah, well, we would see it before then. We'd say, get your hook down. But occasionally it's called a bolter. If your hook is skipping or something else and it won't hook, then that's why the deck is at an angle. This is the main deck, you're like this, you're landing at an angle so that you can take off again. The old World War II ones, they land into a barrier to stop them. But these, we had an angle deck where you could bolter around. I got a bolter one time, and at least others, but I'd taken around, and there's a nitrogen cylinder that gives a down pressure of like 800 pounds. And I'd taken around, and it sucked it all out. So when I landed, the hook just bounced. I couldn't, so I had to go to Da Nang.
That shows the cable in the back there.
So the first thing after you land is a guy would come out to make sure that you'd sort of go and that would sort of roll back. He'd make sure it unhooked that wire from your hook, and then you could taxi out of the way for the next guy. This is just one of those. This is, we call this S2 with a radome on top. You can go through these pretty fast. This is just in Hong Kong with junk. Okay, I think we just click through. This is our squadron. And This will work good. I've got a audio. Oh wait, if you go back just a little bit. It just so happens I've got an audio. This was our commanding officer in my first cruise. This was the executive officer, and then my second cruise. This was a commanding officer, and he's on this audio that I've got, and he was shot down and killed the next day, I think it was. Okay. We'd have underway replenishment where the ship would come along and they'd fly bombs over, hook up lines for fuel and so on. Is that about it? Oh, this was Saigon. I think what was amazing to me was all of the, when we went down to Yankee Station and did some coverage on a town called An Loc and Loch Ninh that were up north of there. When we were in Yankee Station or Dixie Station, you'd fly over Saigon and it was like there was nothing going on. I mean, it was just like a city that'd be like right now. This was when we flew back. This is sort of, this you'll get an idea of what it's like when we did an Alpha strike. But this is when we're just flying back. We had, I transpac back and, that's a long story. Okay.
Ray, how many missions did you?
I have 300 combat missions. I've got 400 landings on the one carrier.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that what that patch is all about?
Yeah. And then you get graded and you got 400 and I got the top 10. Yeah.
Sweet.
I think that's about it. I think what I'll do is play that thing
Right.
now.
I get it.
Yeah.
So every time you launched, did you always have a target in mind? Or did
Yes.
you did? Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking was because it seemed like whenever we got more than what we could handle and our gunships could handle, they'd call in some airstrikes, but it didn't seem like it would take very long.
Well, we get diverted sometimes.
Okay.
And what the rule was in North Vietnam, oh, that's, by the way, that's the big island of Midway.
Oh. Remember the battle there?
And we,
Remember that
once
battle?
I'm transpacking over, we couldn't land at Midway because they had the Goonie birds there. Those birds that'll just fly into anything.
Oh.
So it was too dangerous to be there because they just
Fly right into
fly into you. So it was a Goonie bird time, so we had to wait until we could get. What was I doing?
But you get diverted to.
Oh yeah, and if we were in North Vietnam, we had no forward air controller, so the strikes are all planned before we took off, or sometimes they give us an area to look for something. In South Vietnam, Laos, and any other areas there, you had a forward air controller, so the Air Force all decided what you do. So sometimes we'd get there and get a hold of the FAC. He said, no, I got another, you're going to meet your FAC here. Okay, but I got something else for you, and that's where we'd end up doing something like that.
I had that one picture I showed you that was bombing in front of us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, neither one of us could identify what it was, but
No.
he was bombing.
I thought this was interesting. People of the world unite and defeat the U.S. aggressors and all their running dogs.
And this is what's so interesting, because we would pull into port up in Hong Kong, go ashore, and there'd be these Chinese communists. Yeah. Okay, let's see. We should just go through those. Does anybody else have any questions about shipboard operations? This was the old
What was the name of the carrier?
USS Hancock.
Hancock.
Yeah. And it was commissioned in 1944. I mean, it was just 1 year younger than I was.
My uncle was on the Hancock when I was in high school.
Really?
But he had one guy that I didn't get hooked, I guess, and he.
Well, we lost just about as many with shipboard accidents as, with ramp strikes and so on as, well, it does bring up just one little short fire story. So it's nighttime, it's about midnight. Well, there's a difference between a A4 and a B-52. There's the size. It's after midnight at night. John Bodiansky was his name, F8, and he hit the ramp, but he got airborne. So he comes back around, and he's flying all right. Oh, this was me as the LSO, and there's Lana. You can see how close you are. comes around and he loses hydraulics. So with the F8, he has no backup. So he ejects. Now he's out, so that the ship is recovering aircraft going in the wind. He's done this. He goes in the water, but he knows the ship's going to come up there. It's going to come back around, and so on. Well, they're out looking for it. The helicopter's out looking for him, so he's got a radio. Well, of course, it didn't work. He gets in his raft, and he's got also, we carried 38s with flare or tracer rounds, as well as little flare guns. So he shoots a couple flares up, but it's a cloudy night, nobody sees him. So we think we've lost him. Go out, well, he sees the lights disappear, the carrier, and then over here he sees the carrier coming back here, the lights. He shoots some more, a couple flares, nobody sees him. Well, the next time the ship was coming up by him, it just so happened as the commander of the air group, the CAG, did a bolter. And as he's coming back around, John's down there and he says, well, he's already fired his little flare thing. So he has his 38 out and he shoots at the airplane. He says, I'm either going to get attention or I'm going to get some company. And the commander of the air group sees this flare, that tracer round from 38 go by his thing. And I heard him on the radio, he says, I think we found our pilot. So they rescued him and he got back aboard the thing.
That's it.
Okay.
Another question about, you said they get fined also if they don't have their gear down.
Oh, yeah.
So you see that in time to let them know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they don't.
No, you see them plenty of time.
25 cents.
Yeah.
Raise.
Turn that on. Okay, so I've got some things written up over here because you're going to hear it fast. This is just a couple little missions. And first one is a Alpha strike into North Vietnam. And there on the right you can see how it's sort of set up with the airplane. Those little circles, there's a foreplane